Hi, this is Miss Camp. In this lesson, we are going to talk about something called adverbs of frequency. That is a fancy way of asking the question, how often do we do something? Do we do it a lot, a little, or not at all? For example, how often do you ride a bike? How often do you go camping? How often do you go sailing? How often do you make a sandcastle? How often do you play violin? On the next slide, we will see the words that we use to answer that question. But first, I am going to explain how to make a sound that is in two of those words. It is a difficult sound in English. We can change the sound that we make by turning our voice box on and off. This is our voice box. For example, I can put my teeth on my lip and go like this. That is the sound of the F. Now this time, watch and listen. I won't change my mouth. I will keep making the same sound, but I will turn my voice box on. I will start by having my voice box off, and then listen and see if you can tell when I turn my voice box on. Did you hear that? I had it off, on, off, on, off, on. When it is off, I let all the air out of my mouth. That is the sound of the F. When I turn it on, I can put my hand on my voice box and I can feel it going. I can feel it. The voice box is turned on. And that is when I make the sound of the V. We do this same thing when we are making the sound of the TH. The TH digraph is when we stick our tongue out of our mouth and put our teeth on our tongue, and then we let the air out of our mouth. Like, thank you. You can see that I stick my tongue out. My voice box is off. I don't feel anything here on my throat when I make the sound. But I can turn my voice box on and then the sound changes. Watch and listen if you can hear when it changes. Because the TH can make two sounds, one with the voice box off and one with the voice box on. When it's off, we can say, thank you, think, thoughtful. When the voice box is on, we can make the sound the, this, that. We can also turn our voice box on and off with the sound of SH. SH is a digraph, and we know that it makes the sound sh, like in fish or ship. Sh. And our voice box is off. We can put our hand here, make the sound sh. We can't feel anything. We can turn our voice box on for this, and it sounds like this. I'll start with it off, and then I'll turn it on. You watch and listen. That's a really hard sound to make. We don't make it very often. We make it in a few words we will talk about today. One is this word, usually. Another one is this word, occasionally. Occasionally. When we see T-I-O-N or S-I-O-N in a word, sometimes the voice box is off, like shun, and sometimes the voice box is on, like jeune, like confusion. We have other sounds where we also turn the voice box on and off, like the D and the T. Watch, my mouth will do the same thing. D, t, d, t, d, t. One of them, the voice box is on, and one of them, the voice box is off. If you put your hand on your throat and feel your throat when you make those two sounds, d, t, d, t, Can you tell which one you feel on your hand? It's the sound of the D. That's when the voice box is on, and T, the voice box is off. Now we are going to read these adverbs of frequency. The first one at the bottom is never, never. You can see the V, the voice box is on, never. Rarely, 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 rarely. Occasionally, 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 occasionally. Sometimes, sometimes. Often, often. We do not make the sound of the T in that word. Often. Usually, usually, usually. Always, 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 always. Always, usually, often, sometimes, occasionally, rarely, never. These words tell us how often do we do something. Do we do it a lot? Do we do it a little? Or do we not do it at all? Could you hear the clarinet playing when I was talking? That is because my daughter was having her clarinet lesson in a different room. Okay, so our adverbs of frequency go in a special place in the sentence. But there are different kinds of sentences. We are going to look at 3 different kinds of sentences and where we put these special words. The first kind of sentence we are going to look at is our subject to be adjective kind. I use red, green, and yellow. Our subject tells us who or what the sentence is about. Our verb to be is the word is, and our adjective answers the question, what kind of person, place, or thing is this? So in our example sentence, we have the sun is hot. We want to know, how often is the sun hot? Is it hot never? Is it hot sometimes? Or is it hot all the time, always? So where we are going to put this is we have our subject and we have our verb to be, and over here we have our adjective. We are going to put the adverb of frequency right here in between the word is and the adjective. So it will look like this. The sun is always hot. The sun is always hot. So again, our adverb of frequency is going to go right here in between the verb is and the adjective. The sun is always hot. Our next kind of sentence has a subject at the beginning. That is who or what is the sentence about. We have our action verb. This would be when our subject does what? What does it do? And then after that, we might answer the question what, or where, or when. We answer the question where and when with a prepositional phrase. How often we do this can be answered with never, sometimes, often, always. In this type of sentence, we put the adverb of frequency right after the subject and before the action verb. So let's see how often someone is riding this bike, this banana seat bicycle. Okay, she is our subject. What is she doing? Rides. That's our action verb. What is she riding? Her bike. So our sentence so far has a subject, an action verb telling us what is she doing. She rides, and this one has a object at the end because we want to know, what does she ride? She rides what? She rides her bike. Now we want to know, how often does she ride it? We could say, she often rides her bike. That means she rides it a lot. Some other words that mean almost the same thing as often are frequently. She frequently rides her bike. And usually. She usually rides her bike. Often, usually, and frequently mean a lot. Not all of the time, but a lot. Now we're going to look at a third kind of sentence. This is a kind of sentence that we have not looked at before, and we will be talking about in a later lesson. Have you seen a sentence that has this word, has or have, in it, and after that word there's an action verb? This would be a sentence that has a two-part verb. We have talked about two-part verbs before, like she is eating, is eating. This is a different type of sentence with a different type of two-part verb. It will have the first part, has or have, and then it will have an action verb after it that usually ends with the letters ed. So in this type of sentence, it begins with our subject, which tells us who is it about or what is it about. Okay, a person, place, or thing. And then we will have has if it is just one person or place that's not I and not you, or it will be have if it is more than one person, place, or thing, or if it is I or you. And then it will be the action verb. After that, we can answer the question what, where, or when, if we want to. For putting the adverb of frequency in this type of sentence, it is going to go right in the middle of these two parts of the verb, after the has or have and before the second part, the action part of the sentence. So let's look at an example. Let's see, here's I don't know what order all of these words are in, but this looks like the action is going to be sailing, and that makes sense because look at my picture. This is a beautiful sailboat. I would love to be on that sailboat. Have you ever gone sailing? Well, let's see how often the person in this sentence has gone sailing. So our action verb is sailed. You can see the ed on the end of it. Oh, this is about me, I. And then here's our have or has. This is the first part of the verb. Now I am one person, but I am I. And I goes with have. I have sailed a sailboat. I have sailed a sailboat. I'm missing my period at the end of the sentence. That is a sentence. I could stop right there and I could put a period. I have sailed a sailboat. But I can also say, how often have I sailed a sailboat? A lot, a little, never. I'm going to use the word rarely. Rarely means almost never. I have only sailed a sailboat 1 or 2 times in my life. So I can't say never because that would be 0 times. But I can't say sometimes because that is kind of in the middle. Rarely means almost never. So my sentence is, I have rarely sailed a sailboat. And again, in this type of sentence, when we have two parts of the verb, we put the adverb of frequency right in between those two parts. This is also where we would put the word not. If I wanted to say not, I could say, I have not sailed a sailboat. It would go right in here, in between those two parts of the verb. On this slide, we are looking again at the second type of sentence that we looked at in this lesson. So we have our subject at the beginning, which tells us who is our sentence about or what is our sentence about. That would be our person, place, or thing. We have our action verb, and then after that, we might have an object that tells us what. We might have a prepositional phrase that answers the question where or when. The place where we put the adverb of frequency telling us how often we are doing this comes right after the subject and right before the verb. So in between the subject and the verb. Let's see what our sentence is. It's about a girl. She, here's the verb, plays. Now with this verb, plays can mean a lot of things. There are a lot of different things that can be played. So we have the question, plays what? And the answer is the violin. She plays the violin. That is a sentence. But we might want to answer the question, how often does she play the violin? And we are going to say, sometimes. She sometimes plays the violin. And this goes right between the subject and the verb. Here is a chart that shows everything we just talked about. It shows all three types of sentences. We have this type, we have this type, and we have this type. This last one has a pretty fancy word in it called auxiliary verb. I do not use that term. I call it helping verb, and that is when we are using have or has. It is the type of sentence that I have not talked about yet. So as we look at these one more time, we see here that in the type of sentence that has the subject and it has an action verb. So here the adverb of frequency goes right after the subject and right before the main verb. So in our example, we have Daniel passes his exams. And how often does he do this? Always. Wow, he must be a very good student. Okay, so that's the first type, and all of the examples on this page are using this type. The other type we talked about was when we had the helping verb, has or have. That's part one of the verb, and the other part of the verb is going to have ed at the end of it. And in between the two, we're going to put the adverb of frequency. So our sentence begins with the subject, which is who it's about. This is about Susan. We're saying that she has lived in New York, and we say, how often has she lived in New York? And the answer is always. She has always lived in New York. And the adverb of frequency goes in between the two-part verb, part one and part two. Up here, there's only one verb, So the adverb of frequency goes right before it, after the subject and before the main verb. In the last type, this is the type where we have our subject and then we have our verb to be, which is or are, and then we have at the end we have our adjective. So that one is what we normally do in, let's see if I can get the yellow here, in yellow. Okay, so in this type of sentence, the adverb of frequency is going to come after the verb and before the adjective. He is happy. How often is he happy? He is always happy. Wow, I don't know anyone who is always happy. So here's the last kind, our subject, our verb to be, and an adjective. And in this type of sentence, the adverb of frequency goes after the verb to be and before the adjective. When we have action verbs, the adverb of frequency is going to go right before that action verb, after the subject, and then right before the action verb. And all of the examples on this page are like that. Let's look again at our list. This is a good list of words to know, and these percentages right here are telling us how often. So 100% means all the time, every time. That is the word always. If it's almost always, most of the time, we say usually. A little bit less than that, again, most of the time, we would say normally or generally. Normally, generally. Also, most of the time, these are all very close, almost the same. We would say often or frequently. About half the time, right in the middle, we say sometimes. A little bit less than that, we say occasionally. If it's not very often, see this is 10%, we say seldom. Seldom and rarely mean about the same thing. Both of these mean hardly ever. And then if it's 0%, not once, then we say never. All of these are called adverbs of frequency. And in our example sentences, you can see over here that they all begin with the subject, and then they have the adverb of frequency, and then they have the action verb. These are following this example, this type of sentence right here. The subject, and then the adverb of frequency, and then the action verb. So it's going right in between the two. So if we look at these, you can find the verb. In the first sentence, what am I doing? My verb is brush. Now, with this verb, I really need to say brush what? And the answer is my teeth. So that's my teeth, that's the object. That's answering the question, what do I brush? And then, when do I brush my teeth? Would be at night. In the next sentence, I usually walk to work. So my verb is walk. I usually walk to work. In my next sentence, I normally get good marks. That means I do well at school. What is my verb? My verb is get. Get is a word that really needs to ask the question, what? What do I get? I get what? And the answer is good marks. This is my object. This is what I get. In the next sentence, I often read in bed at night. I often do what? What is my verb? It is read. Where do I read? In bed. When do I read? At night. 2 prepositional phrases. I sometimes sing in the shower. I sometimes do what? Sing. Where do I sing? In the shower. In my next sentence, I occasionally go to bed late. I occasionally do what? For this one, I am going to say go to bed. That's going to be my verb. I occasionally go to bed. I seldom add salt to my food. I seldom do what? Add. Well, this is a verb where I really need to ask, add what? What do I add? So I'm going to get my orange and say salt. That's my object. I seldom add salt to my food. To my food is a prepositional phrase. I hardly ever get angry. I hardly ever do what? Get. And angry, excuse me, is an adjective. Vegetarians never eat meat. Vegetarians never do what? Eat. Well, boy, we really need to know about what is it that they never eat. We need to answer the question, what? We don't want to say they never eat anything. So we say they never eat meat. Meat is the object. It's answering the question, eat what? And so you can see in all of these sentences, we put our our adverbs of frequency. Those are all of these words right here. Always, usually, normally, often. They come after the subject and before the action verb. Okay, this is our last slide for this lesson. It's another chart that is similar to the last one. It is showing the adverb of frequency in this upside down triangle. So at the top we have always, usually, normally, generally, often, frequently, sometimes, occasionally, seldom, rarely, and never. And you can see in all of these sentences, it is following the type of sentence that has the subject and then an action verb. And so the adverb of frequency just goes in between the two. Now, whoever wrote these sentences forgot to put periods at the end of them. If you look at these sentences, you can see where the action verbs are, and there I see a lot of objects and prepositional phrases. So in this sentence, I always wake up at 6 o'clock. There's our verb. When do I wake up? At 6 o'clock. There's our prepositional phrase. I usually come home after work. When do I usually come home? After work. There's a prepositional phrase. I normally swim after school. We can see, what do I normally do? Here's our verb swim. Here's when we normally swim, after school. I often spend Christmas with friends. Here's a prepositional phrase that we haven't talked about too much. It begins with friends. I sometimes play tennis on the weekend. So here our verb is play, and when we have our verb play, we really need to have an object and say play what? And so we have play tennis. When do we sometimes play tennis? We use a prepositional phrase to tell us when. On the weekend. With weekend, we use on. With 6 o'clock, did you notice up here at 6 o'clock, we use at. With the weekend, we use on. I occasionally eat Vietnamese food. What's our verb? Eat. Eat what? Vietnamese food. I seldom go to the library. I seldom do what? Go. Go where? To the library. That's our prepositional phrase. I rarely listen to the radio. I rarely do what? What's our verb? Listen. I think this one, I'm going to say the verb is listen to. We haven't talked yet about these two-word verbs. That's going to be in a lesson coming up soon. I rarely do what? Listen to. Listen to what? The radio. I never listen to rock music. So this one is going to be the same thing. Our verb is going to be listen to, and then listen to what? Rock music. That's a kind of music. And all of these sentences should have periods at the end of them. Okay, that's it for adverbs of frequency.